All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the September 3rd, 2021 meeting of the Vermont Climate Council Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee. Marianne, thank you very much for sending out the agenda. So it's top of our inbox. Overview of the agenda for today. We do have a shortened meeting today. It was in hopes of getting some of the subgroups working on strategies and actions a little bit more time to meet together if they so chose. So we'll have a quick report out just on, status update on where folks are at with those pathway strategies and actions, and outline next steps just as a reminder to folks. And then we will have a couple of reports from Jane on the land use committee, as well as the stakeholder engagement events. And then we'll have a discussion about revisions to the goals that are in play as well. With that, does anybody have any agenda revisions or changes to the minutes that are posted in the agenda? Okay, Catherine, do you have any updates that you'd like to share?
I do not, because everything is covered under all the other reports, but thank you.
All right, so before we jump into the rest of the agenda, are there any pertinent updates that folks would like to share before we just roll right in?
Oh yes, Dale, as well as throughout the meeting. Thank you for that. We somehow missed that on the end.
Erica.
This is Karen. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that everyone probably saw, but New York has set the most rainfall within an hour twice in the past week and a half. So just a reminder of why we're all here. This won't wait 10 years. It's happening now. We've got quite a contingent of people down in New York City as we speak, trying to help put it back together down there. So it's real. Thanks.
Yeah, we were looking at some of the rainfall totals along the I-95 corridor, really north of Delaware through Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and there's just a swath that got between 6 and 7 inches of rain. And just, and then a band outside of that was like 4 to 5 inches. So just unbelievable amount of water for that area of the country, which was already drenched from tropical cyclone Henri.
So this is Karen, and I just wanted to mention, well, actually my sister's down there and they got 9 inches of water, but I also read a Governing Magazine article today on the changing nature of our emergencies that extensively quoted Erica Borneman. I would suggest you all look it up.
Oh, good. Oh, good. I haven't seen it yet, so hopefully it's good.
It was.
Was it in your role as chair of the nation's emergency management directors?
Yeah, incoming chair.
Yes, in case you all didn't know that, we have a star among
Oh, yeah. That means I just get double the amount of interview requests.
And more email, right?
Yeah.
Are we going around the horn talking about our reflections of the last week of climate chaos? Is that what we're doing here?
We asked for pertinent updates, and I think that's pretty pertinent.
Yeah, I mean, has anybody talked about New Orleans? And I think that the New Orleans situation provides another important example as to the importance of this work. When transmission lines get knocked out from climate, exacerbated storms, that's really, really bad. And that speaks to the need for this rural resilience or just any, urban resilience. It just speaks to the need for having not only the big transmission stuff, but the smaller, closer to home, closer to businesses, closer to schools and hospitals, sources of generation paired with storage for energy security. 1 million people without power down there, and they blew off a number of microgrid projects that were proposed following Katrina. So, Yeah, so that's my 2 cents.
And they put that peaker plan in there to save their butts for the next storm. That worked
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Right in the middle of a low and moderate income community. Yep.
I'll also just point out that there is when we talk about rapid intensification of these storms, if you take a look at the National Hurricane Center, we do have a Hurricane Larry, which is forecast to rapidly intensify into a major hurricane, which is Category 4 or 5. So that is worth keeping an eye on. It's my fervent hope that that thing stays out in the Atlantic and doesn't take aim at the eastern United States. Okay, we really know how to start things off. Why don't we go into, so we'll go around the horn from our pathway leads on strategy and action progress. And this is just a quick, like 2-minute, did you meet? How's it going? Are there any clarifying questions? So pathway 1, Chris, is it you or is it you or Bronwyn that wants to?
We were both there. I mean, you were there too. I mean, I can just report out that, we met the other day. Huge thanks to Bronwyn for actually organizing and compiling the information and kind of doing a screen on it. Like, this needs more information. What does this mean? Let's clarify this. So because of that, we were able to kind of quickly go through like a lot of strategies and actions. She rolled up the strategies into a simplified set. And then we were able to quickly go through the actions and kind of flag which ones, don't make a lot of sense right now, which ones need more exploration, and then which ones definitely should be in. And it struck me just from that exercise, there's going to be a little bit of work, because I think there's within even our pathways, there's overlap. So, once we get all of our siloed work done, I think we're going to have to take a look at how all these things fit together. But we have a little bit more cleanup to do, but yeah, I think we're mostly set on that. That was a relatively easy one compared to some of the other ones.
Thanks so much, Chris. Pathway 2, I believe Joe is our lead on that one.
Yeah, hi everybody. So we met this morning and talked about what we did is similar to what Chris just described. There's so many strategies and actions on the list. We started thinking about reorganizing them into more broader, like 3 or 4 strategies, and then going through each of those items that are on that list. And there's definitely duplicates, and there's quite a few that are also very general, so they don't really work well for actions. So that's kind of the work that we have to do. So we got kind of all on the same page about the approach that we're going to take, and I'm going through and kind of doing the reorganization, and then I'll share that with everybody. Then we'll meet again next week and try to kind of nail it down.
Awesome, Joe. Thank you. Pathway 3, Anne.
Hi, everybody. We met on Tuesday, the 31st, and I think our first question was, do we even really need this pathway? Because it's very similar to pathway number 1. And Marion helped us out a lot. She said pretty much yes, because this came from a specific sentence in the Global Warming Solutions Act. So we proceeded on.
I'm glad you asked that question. We should always be asking ourselves that question, like to make sure we don't do something we don't have to do.
So then, our pathway is very short at this point. So we brainstormed, Marion encouraged us to just brainstorm ideas, which she captured, thankfully. And then she also suggested that she sent us links to a couple of earlier documents, and I personally found the Vermont Climate Action Final Report from 2018 to have a lot of good stuff in it that is relevant to residences. And we have a meeting planned next week on Tuesday to catch everything all up. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Anne. Jens, pathway 4.
Oh, I think that's me.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Jens has the star, Chris has the lead. Got it.
Yeah. Sucker is right here. Smart man in the corner. This was the smart growth land use pathway. This has a lot of strategies and actions, and it's going to take, we optimistically have a meeting next week for an hour on Tuesday to get it done. It's going to take probably, we extended it to an hour and a half, but I think it may take a little bit more time to actually sugar that off. So we will probably have to have a subsequent meeting just to kind of finalize it, but we'll get there. And then I can say we have the last pathway too, which is housing. Oh, and I want to mention too, Catherine was unable to join our meeting next Tuesday, so I invited Regina Mahoney from Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission to attend. I just wanted to make sure that while we're talking about this, there was a regional planning rep in the conversation, just to make sure that viewpoint was represented. So I talked a little bit with Marianne about that. She thought it made sense, but just for transparency, I wanted everybody to know.
Well, appreciate that. I think there's a common theme that I'm hearing, which is, there's a lot of paring down, a lot of cleanup to do on these. And I encourage everybody to keep in mind that when these were originally developed, we were looking at, it was meant to kind of put all of the ideas on the board. And then, we've really honed in on the direction of not only this group, but also the goals and objectives that are to go into the climate action plan that come from this group. And I think that really tailors the way we look at each of our pathways and the strategies and actions that'll go underneath that. So, please feel free to be creative. If there's something that's glaringly missing, that your groups are more than willing and able and allowed to add to it. Next steps is we'll come back next week. We'll have a longer meeting. We'll be getting a report out from pathway leads and going through the draft list of strategies and actions for discussion of the entire group. And then we'll be able to refine them a bit more from there. We've given ourselves a little bit of time ahead of the meeting at the end of September, where we need to present these to the Vermont Climate Council, which is a good thing, but we want to be sure that what we're presenting to them is a really solid set of strategies and actions.
And we will have public engagement to feed into some of these as well. So even when your group finishes the work in the coming week, it will not be the be all end all of the work of your groups and of our committees. And I would also encourage you, if you take things off the list, just keep those somewhere in one place, just so we always know what was there that's no longer there, in case there's any questions about that.
I never really reported out on the housing pathway, which is the last one. That's the one that needs the most work. And I am engaging with some housing policy colleagues to make sure that we've got a good list. If you recall, it was kind of added a pathway late in the game, so there weren't a lot of strategies. We did have some in kind of that smart growth ideas document, but I think it needed more. And so I am kind of reaching out to partners at VHCB, Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and then my commissioner, to make sure that we've got a good list of action items there. That's running a little late, but I think we'll have something that will be presentable by Wednesday, Thursday.
Awesome. Marianne.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and talk a bit more about timeline, and thanks Erica and Catherine for teeing that up. So just laying it out for folks, so we're all aware of the milestones. These pathways, which have already been presented to the council, the strategies underneath, and then actions will be presented by your brave co-hosts, Catherine and Erica, at the Climate Council meeting on September 28th. So that effectively gives us, not including this meeting, 3 Rural Resilience Friday meetings until then. That being said, there's sort of a shift that's happening because the Climate Council is moving so quickly to get through a huge body of work that we are going to be asking subcommittees for anything that is going to be presented to the council be available for review a week in advance, so they have an appropriate amount of time to review that work. And that's because, as you all know, you're working through these strategies and actions. There's a lot, and you're just one of 3 subcommittees that are developing that. So there's no way we'll be able to present all of the actions, but we want to be able to give the council a full list of those so they can ask questions about them. So working backwards, It's a meeting on the 28th, which is a Tuesday, which means ideally we have a final spreadsheet posted from the subcommittee by the 21st. So that gives us 2 Friday meetings, the 10th and the 17th, to prepare for that. And then the 24th could be used to sort of revise the presentation that's going to be shared with the full council. So I think, as Erica identified, having folks, pathway leads and pathway groups coming to the meeting next week prepared to talk about your refinement process, I think is a really good idea. One thing I would flag is I think it may be a good idea to come prepared to talk about any strategies or actions that you all think might be controversial that we have to really come to consensus on as a full subcommittee. So we may not be able to talk about all the strategies and actions in our 2-hour meeting, but if there are a couple that need to be flagged, that perhaps we want everybody to weigh in on, so that we're prepared, with a response if it comes up at the council as well. That's probably a good thing to focus on for next week. And then for the meeting on the 17th, finalizing that full list, understanding that there's probably going to be additional refinement needed. And we'll get to this in a moment, but our rural communities stakeholder event is going to take place on the 15th. So we'll have some great feedback from that event that we can hopefully try and turn around quickly to get in for some final changes on the 17th before we decide to post that document the following week for the meeting on the 28th. So I can send this out in an email, but hope that lines up, Catherine and Erica, with what you all were thinking, but wanted to lay out the month of September because it's going fast.
Yeah, thank you. And
When is that meeting on the 15th, Marion? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in just a moment, but it's going to be on the 15th from 6 to 8 p.m.
Okay. Thanks.
Jane?
I was just going to say, Marion did an excellent job laying out the work ahead of you for September, and I thought I would just put a few finer points on a couple components with just to be mindful of some moving pieces at the steering committee and council level around prioritization and the expectation around at what level you'll consolidate and consider actions. So I just wanted to flag that as a topic of conversation for the steering committee meeting on the 7th, and then ultimately, hopefully, to be vetted and decided upon by the council on the 14th. So that direction will come to subcommittees. And then also, since we've spoken about it at the council and here in the past, wanted to let you know that as we're thinking about prioritization, one of the components of that is the equity component of the criteria that we're considering. And that speaks to the guiding principles and the scoring rubric and capacity being brought to bear to help you all support the operationalizing of that. And just wanted to let you know that we had someone submit a bid this week on that work. And we're in the contract negotiation phase. And my hope and expectation is that by the end of next week, we'll have that person on board who will be able to lay out a timeline for working with and expectations of working with the subcommittees in providing support to both you all and then ultimately to the council around the usefulness and adoption of using the scoring rubric and how it fits into the space.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, any other questions related to next steps for strategies and actions before next week? Everybody good?
Thank you to everybody for everything you're doing to move this forward. It's really, really great. A lot of great work, a lot of great work happening.
Awesome, yeah. Okay, so let's move into land use in the Climate Action Plan meeting. And that's Jane.
I'll just start with a brief update and then invite others who are participating in the meeting to feed into anything I might have left out or omitted or questions. There is a process afoot to create a CAP drafting task lead crew. I don't even know ever what to call them, but the process being to formalize engagement with counselors and thinking about the CAP outline, the structure, and thinking about who will take lead on drafting components of the CAP that don't have primary authors, thinking about how we elevate cross-cutting issues, and then thinking about how we pull in subcommittee work in a fluid and consistent way throughout the CAP. That will be likely adopted by the steering committee on the 7th and then presented as a group to the council on the 14th to invite counselors in to help and support that work. In the meantime, recognizing that there'll most definitely be a role for that group in thinking about land use, it's so clear that land use is the primary cross-cutting theme coming out of the subcommittees that works towards emissions reductions, sequestration, resilience, adaptation. And so rather than wait for that group to come together, we acted in service to that group and the council in pulling together a preliminary meeting just to help get the thoughts going on how land use could work. In elevating it out of particular components of work and thinking about how we speak to it in the climate action plan, as well as then thinking about who's going to take the lead on thinking about the how for land use, you know, the action items and the implementation. And so where we were able to get to, we invited Catherine and Chris and Bronwyn, and I think that's it for this subcommittee, along with Peter Walk and Joey and Gina leading sort of cross-sector, and then the transportation space there, and then Billy Coster represented ag and ecosystems. We started to just highlight how significant land use is as a group and started to speak to how we could revise the CAP outline as a proposal to this CAP drafting group to consider for how we would think about land use. And then also respected that the 3 subcommittees, as you're thinking about pathways and strategies, would be flagging those that have that relate to land use and are pertinent to cross-cutting. And that on the week of September 13th, with that in mind, we would pull this group back together to review those ideas and then think about a really structured plan to move forward with that action item drafting, recognizing that it doesn't make sense for everybody in their silos at that point to really think through the how, but either we would form one group that met consistently with representation from all those subcommittees, or we would empower a subset of those folks to move forward with that. And we didn't decide on that component of the work yet. But it felt nice to bring people together, recognize the importance of land use really throughout, and really start to think about how we're going to get it done in a thoughtful way, and to really give it the importance that it needs up above, recognizing that we don't want it to feel watered down as like secondary strategies everywhere, but really pull it out and bring that consistent theme to it. So anyone else can speak to that for now. There's so many moving pieces with the CAP drafting and then ownership of these ideas in subcommittees. So just mindful of how we move forward. But I'm thankful to Bronwyn in particular, who's started to think about how we could incorporate it into the CAP. And Marion and I are going to look at her ideas and think about how we share that with the council and others. Thad?
Yeah, I was just wondering, not that I need any more tasks or responsibilities on my list, but I guess I'm wondering, Jane, and I guess Erica and Catherine, as well as the leads of the subcommittee, if I could participate in that group. Got a lot of experience with land use with respect to energy projects. And I would imagine I've got a few things to share. Is that possible?
And weren't you on Smart Growth Vermont's board at one time or something? Maybe.
Yep. Yeah, I could speak to that a little bit. That's going a few years back, but yeah, just I think with respect to energy siting, that's a big deal right now, and
Yeah,
I've got a number of thoughts.
I would welcome that. I would say I didn't ask you because I know you volunteer for so many other things. But if you're willing, I think your perspective would be a nice addition. Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and I as we think this through, I also want to be mindful that there are so many subcommittee members and counselors who feel vested in land use, and so regardless of who ends up sitting around the table, there will certainly be space for everybody to weigh in on the ideas and actions being put forward. So if Chad joins us, or great. If not, there'll be space for people who have vested interest to weigh in, because it does, we heard that loud and clear this morning at Ag and Ecosystems too, that people felt excluded from that meeting, and just trying to think about how we move forward in a streamlined fashion, recognizing the timeline, but also make sure that we have consensus around the ideas that are put forward and are thinking about everything, not missing things.
And the purpose, what we did at that meeting was not policy related, it was process, and trying to think about recognizing that all of these subcommittees have land use as part of their purview. How do we not spin our wheels and all of our subcommittees do a lot of work in our silos and then go to try to combine them together and realize that they don't work together. So we were trying to figure out how do we have a process where respect the subcommittees, but make sure that we're efficient and effective in our work.
I was going to say that exact same thing, Catherine, that this initial meeting, and it was just initial, there will be more, was to really, again, think about that process and how it actually shows up in the plan. And I think would welcome your input, Chad, and we'll, when there are future meetings, try to include you. But I would just, I guess, remind everybody that if you have ideas about how to approach these issues differently that would make our communities more resilient, this is the space to do so in your subcommittee. This is where you bring up the policy changes, the recommendations on new programs, the funding initiatives. I mean, this is the opportunity to do so. We're not trying to take that away from the subcommittee. We're just trying to think holistically about the fact that it is so cross-cutting. How do we not duplicate efforts and actually writing that into the plan? But in terms of policy recommendations, this is the subcommittee. This is how you do it. It's through the work that we're doing right now.
Joe, you want to be on another committee? Come on.
Well, this is Karen again, and certainly I think Chris and I have talked about a little bit, a core issue for local governments who administer land use. And so even if I'm not on that subcommittee, given my terrible track record here, but I would be very interested in what y'all are talking about and contributing as warranted, I guess.
You don't have a terrible track record, Karen.
I feel like I do.
Well, there's a track record and there's an attendance record, and I think there's differences.
Oh, okay. I'm getting F in attendance. Anyway.
Okay, any other comments on the land use subgroup there? And Jane, did you want to update us on the stakeholder engagement events?
I can update on general process for stakeholder engagements, and then Marion and Catherine Morris, who has graciously joined us from CBI, can update on sort of the finer points associated with the rural communities one. But as you'll all remember, there was the capacity to step forward and put some events together that were focused specifically on the technical questions that you wanted to ask related to the ideas being put forward. And as this subcommittee refined and looked at your pathways, the common theme across the pathways, but then really resonating in pathway one, is really around rural and town capacity to actually implement the ideas that are being asked of them out of all the subcommittees really at this point. And so there has been a lot of effort gone into thinking about how we do that efficiently and well in a short period of time, and who the right stakeholders are. And specifically a finer point around the questions that we would want to ask in the breakout groups. And I know Catherine has shared ideas with Marion, and Catherine Dimitrick has shared ideas with Marion, and Catherine Morris has been working also on refining the agenda based on the group that has been meeting. So happy to turn that over. I know, as Marion said, that it's coming right up on the 15th. So look forward to learning more about those components of the work and inviting the whole subcommittee in to comment on it. And for folks who don't know, Catherine Morris works for CBI. She's one of the team of Pat Field and David Plum, who have been associated with the work of the council and supporting both the council steering committee and the subcommittees in their work. And Catherine was finally supports the cross-sector mitigation work, and also has the experience coming off of their stakeholder events of working to support the 3 stakeholder events that were held in August to support the sectoral recommendations coming out of cross-sector specifically for transportation, buildings, thermal, and electricity that we held in partnership with the Public Service Department. So she's coming right off of 3 other stakeholder engagement events. So we also are learning from what was gleaned from those events as well, like what's working and what didn't.
So Catherine, I don't know if you want to say anything. I can jump at Catherine Morris, sorry, but Catherine Dimitrick, you're also able to jump in. I can provide a bit more detail given some conversations and the discussion at our last meeting. And I've actually taken the most recent revised agenda that you sent me, Catherine Morris, and have revised it a bit further. And I think would be interested in sharing it with the subcommittee just to get everyone's thoughts on it. And we can sort of walk through what we're thinking the event could look like, but certainly still very much in draft form. So would appreciate some quick feedback from folks, if that makes sense. Does that work? Okay. So as I said earlier, the meeting we've decided will be on September 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. We've been working with a smaller group of us from the subcommittee. So Catherine Dimitrick, Dave Snedeker, who else? I'm blanking on who else has been involved in those conversations.
I was supposed to be there Tuesday,
Mike was
but I
there
didn't
for
make
one
it.
meeting. Thanks,
Yeah.
Mike. Anyway, a number of folks. Just shout out
And-
if you've been involved.
Yeah, I can just say, and Karen, this is for you. I do have a call into Ted to invite him to be a presenter there. And just as a heads up, in case you see Ted as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Mike. I was going to flag that for Karen too, in case that message hadn't been shared yet. And a reminder for folks, this is really, again, the opportunity for you all as a subcommittee to engage with the stakeholders primarily around and in rural communities, which is a broad scope of people, which is going to be sort of why we're looking at structuring the agenda in such a way so we can get substantive feedback from folks in a 2-hour period, but to get feedback from folks and ideas about really where do we move with actions, because you guys are really in the depths of action development, consolidating your strategies, thinking about actions, and really thinking about what might we be missing, or what are really the best practices for rural communities, so we can address those as that's really the charge of this subcommittee. So understanding we have a 2-hour time frame, we have really a quick introduction. Either myself or Jane will do a brief overview of the climate action plan process and the timeline, so folks understand where we are in the development of the climate action plan, the public engagement timeline, and sort of where these stakeholder meetings are sitting, and how that feedback will be incorporated into the plan. And then, as Mike said, are hoping that we can get Vermont League of Cities and Towns Director Ted Brady to give some remarks, maybe talking about a town or a location that has made a strategic shift when we, perhaps comes to flood resilience or other resilience efforts, would be a great way to sort of tie it back to the work that a lot of our rural municipalities are doing or should be taking on as we think about adaptation to climate change. We'll then move into an overview of our pathways. And I think, we went back and forth about really focusing in on pathway 1, which talks a lot about capacity. And I think, through multiple conversations in this subcommittee, I think we all agree that the issue of capacity is tied to all of our pathways, in order to implement changes to municipal government or land use policies or discussions around housing. It's all really comes down to a question of capacity and what that means at a rural municipal level. So I think providing a brief overview of the pathways, perhaps diving a little bit more into pathway 1, which again talks about that capacity issue. And then perhaps if we have time, talking about some of the strategies as well, understanding that the pathways are really broad. And so we want to provide some tangible examples for people to grasp onto as we think, as we dive into our breakout sessions and start to ask for their input. And then also tie in how equity is being considered in this process. And we'll tie to the guiding principles and the work of the Just Transition Subcommittee and hope to center that in some of the conversations. And then the bulk of the meeting will be breaking out into breakout rooms. We don't have a real sense of how many folks are going to come yet, but I think we have a wide range of organizations we're hoping to co-sponsor with, which means they're helping to share this with their networks and maybe, present in the breakout rooms. I know, Catherine Morris, you've said with the Climate Action Plan, Comprehensive Energy Plan, technical stakeholder workshops, the highest number you had was, I think, 71 participants. And those were much longer events. So we may see some pretty high numbers, especially given the sort of broad focus of this event. So, breakout rooms, I tend to think of really small, but it may be breakout rooms of 20 people or so. But we really want to break down this session into smaller groups so we can have a bit more of a detailed conversation with folks. And then we're hoping to spend about an hour in breakout rooms. I'll jump into the questions in just a moment, but just want to say that really the bulk will be in breakout rooms from 6:45 to 7:45. Then we'll have some takeaways and then finish the meeting. So the bulk of the conversation will be in breakout groups. And the intent is that we'll have a series of questions, both a facilitator and a note taker in every breakout room. And that's something I want to ask folks about today. But a facilitator and a note taker in every breakout room. And the note takers will be capturing that feedback, and CBI is then going to roll that up and provide that back to the subcommittee so you all can use that to inform your action development. So that's where kind of the feedback will come back to you all, is through the note taking at the breakout rooms. I will say that one of the other subcommittees that's working on their forestry event is interested in doing a short survey afterwards. If that's something you all are interested in doing, that's something you could develop and share with your folks after, if you think there may be people who are more interested in providing written feedback than verbal. So the breakout rooms, what we're thinking of doing so that we can both get feedback on a number of the pathways that we're thinking about and sort of themes of work that we're addressing in the subcommittee, but also not dive so deep into the details that we don't really get a broad set of ideas, is to start with introductions. And Jens had a great idea, is to sort of ask folks, what makes your community unique, or what is something that your community is challenged with? I think as we talk about, as we have talked about capacity in this subcommittee, it can mean staff, it can mean funding or financing, it can mean education or mindsets of community members. So it's really, there's probably a wide range of feedback we'll get. And so it would be an interesting icebreaker to have folks just reflect on that or talk about something that makes their community unique. And then we'll also tee up the conversation about what does capacity mean for your community. And then what we're hoping to do, and this is, we need to do some additional work on the questions and frame these out a bit more. But ask folks, using the pathways that we presented. And one thing to think about is potentially using the goals that we've developed, really thinking about, where are we going? Where's the direction of this climate action plan? What has his subcommittee been thinking about? And asking folks, how do you as a municipality or a community think you'll be able to reach success in these areas? And breaking it down either by the pathways or saying, broadly across greenhouse gas emission reductions, adaptation, resilience, what do you need to reach success in those areas, and help facilitate a process and a conversation around that. I'd welcome feedback from folks on the breakout questions. I know Catherine and I had a conversation about this the other day, and would welcome folks' feedback on this, but this will be the bulk of the conversation. And I think we are thinking of teeing up some specific actions for the facilitators so that if the conversation lags a bit, we can actually throw out some specific examples for folks. So if you all have thoughts as you're working through your actions and want to send those to us, I think that may be helpful to tee up for the facilitators. But I'll stop there for a second and see if anybody has feedback on questions or additional ones you think we should add, or if we're completely missing the mark on these and should go a different direction.
Hey, Chris Cochran, just some feedback from what we've learned is, if Ted Brady can't make it for some reason, often we found that towns talking to other towns is a good way to communicate. So for example, if you wanted to showcase the work that Brandon's done to make its community more resilient, have some local officials talking about what they've done and the actions that they've done, it may be more relatable to your audience, that you can do this, it's not impossible. And then just one clarification on the ARPA stuff. Towns have received the ARPA money, and the state of Vermont, and many of the agencies are working with VLCT to do a kind of education event about how do you take your local money, match it with state ARPA funds to do something terrific, and it could be anything. It could be, a new wastewater plant. It could be new infrastructure. It could be climate change. They've got a lot of room within the ARPA criteria to make infrastructure related investments. And it seems like while we're making those investments, they should be thinking about resiliency.
I would just make one comment, this is Karen, about surveys. I think that local officials are more inundated with surveys right now than they ever have been. So I don't know if you can make it like a 3-question survey or something, you're likely to get better responses.
And the league just put out a survey too, I saw.
I know, I know.
Well,
Guilty.
Karen, we don't have to do a survey at all. I was just throwing it out as an example that one of the engagement groups was thinking of doing in addition to the sort of breakout group minute taking. So throwing it out there, but if you all don't think the surveys would get much response, we do not have to dedicate time to that.
If there was another mechanism for getting response, I think you might be better served trying to do that. So,
we've used more like real-time surveys during some of these meetings, and so you're just getting the results from the people that are there, but it's also kind of a icebreaker sort of thing. So a few key questions, it could even be questions about like who's actually there, and are you from a town or whatever. And maybe there's a few of these questions down below just to get people's, primed and ready to go into the breakout sessions.
Yeah, and a great point. I think we were thinking about in the initial, in the beginning, so we're not going to we'll do introductions when folks are in breakout rooms, but it's going to be likely a lot of people to do introductions with the full group, but have them do it in the chat so people can say what their name is and where they come from, what town they're representing or organization. So kind of spam the chat with that, and then we'll at least have a record in the chat of where folks are coming from. And we can go back to the breakout questions, but I did want to talk shortly about the report outs from the breakout groups, because we had talked as a small group that sometimes report out from breakout groups is just not very helpful. You kind of get the same stuff from everybody and folks repeat the same thing. But Catherine Dimitrick had a really interesting example from another meeting you've been at. Catherine, do you want to talk to that, or I'll let you speak to it if you'd like.
I can just speak to it generally, that the meeting was set up so that the top ideas from each of the breakout groups were presented in a visual format, like really quickly up on a screen. And the meeting participants had a couple minutes to look at them and think about them, and then give real-time comments like thumbs up, thumbs down, this is great, love to hear more about it. And I don't know the mechanism that was used, but it was a much more effective way of hearing from the other groups versus the traditional report out approach.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And Catherine Morris, maybe we could explore what tools we could potentially use for that. Because I think it'd be an interesting way to say, like, okay, it seems like all breakout rooms talked about, this specific land use challenge, but only one group talked about this specific issue. And it sounds like folks want a lot more information on that. So that sounds like an interesting way to do it. I just don't know if we'd need to dedicate more time to report outs if we did it that way.
I haven't raised this before, but I am a little concerned about sort of dedicating a lot of time to having everybody in the breakouts go around and say their name and say something about their town. I think that would be 20 to 30 minutes if you do that, potentially. But I like the idea of maybe using a real time type of survey tool that you can use, where people could actually put the information into a survey, whether it's asking them what part of the state they're from, or what are their biggest challenges. It could be open-ended questions, but yeah, I can see using a tool like that would make that run a lot quicker, and you still get a lot of information and share it visually.
Yeah, and then the facilitator could show it up and just quickly show it and then dive into the questions. That's a good idea.
I just want to mark time because
Yes.
we do need to transition over to goal revisions. Are there any last thoughts on this one?
Just a question about, what's the role of the subcommittee members in these meetings?
Great question. So as much or as little participation as you'd like. I think, you know, this, of all the engagement events, this is probably one of the most important ones for you all to participate in. I can send an email out after our understanding we're tight on time, but I think we would like to, if folks are interested in helping be facilitators, that may be an option. I think talking to Jens and both Catherine, we certainly have groups of facilitators we could tap into, but if you all are interested in either being a facilitator or just participating in the event and in the breakout rooms, that would be a great way to be involved.
We also need some note takers and
note takers
do that report out piece. So somebody can sort of synthesize in real time.
Yep. So I think what I'll do, I'll send an email. I have a event holding it on the time on everyone's calendar for the 15th. So I'll send that to the full subcommittee and follow up. And if folks are interested in taking a more active role in the event, either as a facilitator or note taker, let me know and we'll put you on the list.
And speaking of the timing, just as a final comment, it's scheduled for the 15th. Today
That's the EAN summit.
is it the same day as the EAN summit?
Yep.
EAN Summit ends at 6 and this event starts at 6.
Oh, perfect.
Hopefully it's a good timing, but.
Okay, but we have it scheduled for the 15th. Today's the 3rd. Labor Day is a holiday. So it's the 7th. Since we don't have anything to send out to people today, the 7th is the next regular day of work for people to send this out to our community members, and it's scheduled for the 15th. That seems like.
Yeah, I think you're flagging I think it's too tight, if you ask me. I guess I would just ask you if, I don't see why it couldn't be in conflict, Marion. It's not ideal the following Wednesday. But the following Wednesday, we have one of our statewide events planned. So, yeah, were Monday nights a problem? Because the following Monday night is not.
Mondays are very often select board meeting nights.
Okay, that's right. I knew there was something against like that. Yeah, I think it's too, unless you can do something today, which feels possible. I'm not sure.
How about November? We've got a lot of time in November.
Could we just turn this agenda into a quick bullet little paragraph instead of finalizing it and just send it out like that? Because like the rural caucus is asking me for something to send out to their people. And then I know Karen is waiting for us to give something to put on their website, and then same with GMP. But I don't think we can put the agenda out as it is, not knowing one, for if Ted even wants to do it, if we're going to do something with other select board people instead. But we could just say, talk about success of resilience in a community for, say, the TED topic, and leave it at that.
Yeah, do a save the date kind of thing. If you look at some of the other events that are going on, like the pupil waiting task force or the speakers traveling tour, they're not giving really much more than a week's notice on those now. I think they're presuming that people can join from Zoom and don't need to juggle a lot of schedules.
So I think two things. We can turn the agenda into a short save the date. I don't have any time to dedicate to that until 3:30. So if someone else wants to take that on, that'd be great. The second is, I think we've talked about doing some sort of RSVP for this. Is that correct? I'm looking for folks who've been in this meeting to confirm. So we'd have to make the Zoom link and the Zoom RSVP and perhaps put that in with the blurb, the save the date blurb.
You know, to Karen's point, if it is just a Zoom meeting, maybe next Tuesday is plenty of notice. It's still eight days.
Catherine, I mean, I don't know what time you have, but I'm happy to do that. Save the date right after this meeting. Something just got canceled for me at 2 o'clock, so I have a half hour. So I can do that with you then, and the Zoom link is no big deal. I think I can do that too. I've never done one with a registration, but I'm sure I could figure it out. Or CBI did the one for the agriculture one.
I'm assuming you meant Catherine Morris with that question, but okay.
I am out until probably about 3:30, but I'll be back 3:30 and can help on the Zoom thing. I've never done that either, but I can learn.
So then let's leave it that we'll try to get a save the date available by the end of the day today, so we can at least start to get that circulating to people, and then we can continue to refine the agenda.
I think if you send it out on Tuesday, it's after the holiday, it might be just as good because a lot of people are already out of the office today for the long weekend. So don't drive yourselves crazy.
That's good feedback to have from an actual local official. Thank you, Anne.
And is someone going to put it on MuniNet? I would be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, once we have it, we'll send it up to the full subcommittee so folks can post and share with networks as appropriate.
Okay, we should move into goal revisions. I'm not sure who's leading that one.
I think Chris and I are tag teaming. There's not too much to cover here, so I think it's okay that we spent a bit more time on that. Quick reminder for folks, this Chris needs his phone. We talked about goals at our last meeting, incorporated some of the incorporated feedback from the Climate Council. A lot of that feedback was really more related to actions that should sit under those goals. But I think there are two things we have to cover today. The third being that Pathway 3 group still needs to finalize our goals. We decided to focus on strategies and actions first, because that has more of a tight deadline, and then we'll focus on goals. So that one is still up in the air. The two that we need to focus on are, one, the attaching a percentage to the 2030 goal of Pathway 2, and I'll pull up the PowerPoint. And then the other is to solidify what exactly we're saying for the river corridor goal. So if we can do those two in the next couple minutes, or at least have some next steps for them, that would be great. And I will pull up the presentation and then perhaps hand it over to you, Chris. Okay, so this was the first one.
Yep. So we didn't have any great ideas of what this number should be. And often public policy in Vermont is made by picking a number, and we didn't feel like we wanted to pick that number by ourselves. So I don't know how to get at what the right number is. And so any thoughts from the group would be helpful.
It's 9 years from now. I say we should make it 100.
Aim high, Catherine. Any other thoughts on that?
I agree.
I agree.
Yeah, these are goals, so let's shoot for the moon.
Yeah.
Okay, that was easy.
Boom.
And then the other,
Anybody not agree with that before we just move on?
Yeah.
I'll steamroll you if you haven't had a chance to jump in.
Yeah. This is often the best time to make decisions in meetings. So,
Friday afternoon before a holiday weekend. Yeah.
right.
We're not saying how they get those resources. We're just saying they should have them, right?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of assistance available. Yep.
This one's tricky for a lot of reasons. Currently, river corridor policy, this is the state river corridor policy, which is a different kind of map than FEMA's maps. So those are larger areas that are supposedly allow rivers to meander, except when it runs through a settled area. There's different rules and provisions for these areas. And right now, the river corridor rule allows reasonable amounts of infill so long as it doesn't create any more hazard downstream. So that's something that's really not captured here. And I don't know how to balance that with all the news that we hear every day. I don't know what the future is going to look like, and maybe is the current policy right? My concern, I don't want to see our villages and downtowns stop growing, and many of these channels are managed, and while they may be flooded, they're not moving anytime soon, or if they're moving, they'll be moving incrementally. So I don't know if I'm helping us making any decision, but we struggled with this one and we need some feedback from the group on this goal.
Dale has her hand up.
I don't need to go ahead of committee members, though, if folks have things they want to say.
We're assuming you're
Go
going to solve this for us, so go ahead.
I would like to encourage you to think about making that 2030 goal the 2025 goal, and making the 2050 goal the 2030 goal. And I'm just reflecting on the comments that you all shared at the start of the meeting. And someone said we don't have 10 years. So I just put that out there for you to think about, because I think that these goals are well stated, but not in scale to the problem.
Got some raised hands. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, just thinking about Chris's question, or maybe I need to clarify it a little bit, but is the issue that if there's we want to encourage development in designated centers, but if it's in a river corridor, maybe not so. And if that's kind of where you're coming from, and what I was thinking about is just, there needs to be an adjective, sort of like no new development or redevelopment that, makes the situation worse,
Yeah.
right? Because I think that's kind of what the idea is, that if you are going to develop in centers, it's done in a way that, doesn't exacerbate the situation. There's probably a better way to say it.
And you also develop in ways where the actual structure, whatever the development is resilient into the future.
Right.
And it also links to, are there opportunities upstream and downstream to protect these areas by restoring floodplains? So,
right.
Unfortunately, I've got a 2 o'clock meeting and I have to jump.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. It looks like we have Jens. Thanks so much for all your work on this.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
It looks like we have Jens and then Ben.
I'm sorry. I think there's a spatial component to the where makes the situation worse. And if we could just be more spatially explicit, like we want no development outside of those town centers. And so we're allowing for development within those town centers, infill that's even sometimes within the floodplain, but then we're saying we don't want that development outside. So I'd rather have language that's spatially explicit than things like makes the situation worse.
I agree with that.
Likewise.
I'm not quite ready to agree to that. There may be other areas outside of those downtowns that are suitable for development, and we have pretty much an extreme housing crisis here. We're not going to be able to resolve it all in downtown centers and designated areas.
But I think when you get outside of the designated areas, there's lots more room for those things to go, whether it's good or bad. That's not in the, flood hazard area. Whereas in the town centers, there's maybe not so many options.
Oh, okay, so maybe I'm misunderstanding Jens's comment to have been universal to places outside the designated areas.
My comment was to really encourage development, infill development in our downtowns, and really keep it out of the floodplain outside of those downtowns.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's different. Karen, I took his comment to be the same as you. And so you and I definitely heard it differently. So it sounds like the wording that Marion has put on the screen. Is that you, Marion, that's running that?
Yeah, I know it's not good. So tell me.
No, I think that your wording actually reflects what Jens intended, which was different than Karen and I heard. So
got it. It's still a weird sentence though, so I can.
Yeah, but I'm okay with the wording there. Okay. Does that make sense, Karen?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Ben.
Yes, thank you. I'm trying to keep up with that conversation, but I wanted to go back to, I guess what Karen said about the notion that development or redevelopment that is in state designated or that in state designated areas which are flood prone, that's the place for a building code which stipulates that any new development or redevelopment is flood hardened or sufficiently elevated, and that would actually help us to score better in FEMA's current BRIC scoring by having building codes that specify base flood elevations +2. This is exactly what we did in Waterbury when we rebuilt the Waterbury State Office Complex in a flood zone, but above the 500-year flood elevation.
And I'm not sure I'm getting what you're suggesting. Are you suggesting an edit to refer to building codes now?
No new development or redevelopment occurs in the state designated areas, which is not which doesn't meet codes for flood protection. I'm sorry.
So if you're building downtown, you're building it flood resistant.
Right. If we've got downtowns and they're in flood prone locations, the development and redevelopment that occurs there has to be able to withstand flooding. We've already
Something like that it's because we're not referring to the no development. We're referring to the development that's in the designated areas, and it's been
right.
the
We're
flood standard,
trying to not
whatever we want to
prohibit
call it.
development or redevelopment in development centers which are already in flood prone locations. That has to occur based on standards which protect against the reality, which is that the river is going to try to flood those places. And we've already said we're taking this space from the river and we're going to have human development there. So let's have human development there, which is able to withstand the flooding.
It's Vermont's version of coastal areas built on piers.
Yep.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have the perfect words for it, but I think that's the nuance.
So we should be conscious of time here. Understanding we shortened this to an hour meeting.
Anyone else want to jump in with thoughts on these pathways, or do you think we've had enough to give folks a direction to wordsmith it?
Well, I'm just wondering about the Dale's suggestions.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, I'm not sure I agree with it or not, to be honest with you, just because it's just kind of thrown up there, if those are reasonable timeframes or not. 2025 is not very far away. You know, it's almost 2022. And so, and the plan's not even done yet. So, yeah, that time frame just seems really close to me. But I, work in the transportation world where everything takes 10 years at least.
I don't know if I want to sit on that one too. I think it's definitely something to think about.
Do we want to come back and revisit this I think we can, within
with the whole package.
Yeah, during this month, make sure that we have some consensus around this and actually have time to discuss it a little bit more.
Yeah, so I can fix this a bit, send it out to folks just to think about for a while. And again, timeline, these aren't going to go back to the council, so you all have time to sort of think on these and ensure that it's incorporated into your full package for the cap, but there's no deadline to take it back to the council. So we have time, sometime.
Yeah, I definitely encourage you all to take a look at those and rereading them. The 2025 and the 2030 aren't that different. So maybe Dale's suggestion might have some merit. So we should definitely think about that.
Okay, do we want to move into public comment? Silence means consent. Is there any public comment?
Dale says she's all set. Thanks, Dale.
Okay, any other parting comments before we go our separate ways today? Okay, well, I appreciate 7 extra minutes of your time, and have a wonderful holiday weekend, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
See ya.